Hey guys, welcome back to the Deeply Graphic Design Cast. This is Nick Longo. Well, we're going to dive into something that is just lighting up design, Twitter design, LinkedIn design, Reddit, you name it. Cracker Barrel. What the hell happened? This beloved chain that basically screamed grandma's biscuits and road trip Americana just dropped its iconic logo. The dude leaning up against the barrel is gone, and let me tell you, people are not handling it well. I've sat through this entire week and just kind of looked at it and didn't have much of an opinion. Yeah, it kind of like there's two different ways you can look at it. It was being looked at in the design world, and it was being looked at in kind of like the political world. And one thing I was just noticing was this kind of idea that it's just another example of what a lot of folks were calling debranding or unbranding. And it was these logos just getting to the point where in a rebrand, they were just neglecting their historic, iconic reputation and value and kind of imagery when it came to their logos getting less and less complex. So here's the deal. This isn't just about Cracker Barrel. I think we're talking about it so much right now because I think this was such an extreme example of debranding. This is a much bigger trend. The slow stripping away of detail, history, and this is the one that gets me the most, is storytelling and branding. Like, we're told to be storytellers and problem solvers when we're going at it and being a designer. And particularly in rebrands, I think this is most important to kind of continue in there. And we're in this era of debranding. And the question is, are we gaining flexibility or are we losing soul? And it's probably a lot of both, right? We all know why these logos are getting less complex and more simple. It's digital screens, it's kind of notoriety and kind of like spotting it out from a mile away. And yes, you can say there are way too complicated of logos that have too much complexity that should be looking at stripping things down. But when you have a story that's being so richly told in your logo, shouldn't it have some leverage? Shouldn't it stay in there in some way? And there are so many ways to look at these brands and say, we could still pay respect to it by keeping a certain element or whatever it might be. Not to please the audience so much, but just to keep the reputation and the storytelling alive in your brand. So let's unpack the good, the bad, and this toolkit that I think every designer, especially you freelancers out there, really need to know when you're handling the keys to a rebrand. So the Cracker Barrel case study, let's dive into this a little bit. Let's set the table, shall we? All right, so on August 18th, Cracker Barrel unveiled a brand new logo, just a text-based word mark in a condensed sans serif typeface. Gone was the nostalgic illustration of Uncle Herschel leaning on the barrel. Gone were the warm sepia tone and old-fashioned charm that was in the original logo. That wasn't just a logo swap in any means. This was part of a $700 million modernization called All the More. That's like their new tagline that they want to kind of like lean on, which includes lighter restaurant interiors, revamped menus, updated lighting, and even mobile ordering. So I guess this was all part of this new $700 campaign, All the More. And yes, I mean, we can't blame a company for knowing things to change and wanting to do it. And one thing I noticed that was so great is like a lot of these people saying like, you can't comment on this unless you've been to a Cracker Barrel. And I've been to many Cracker Barrels in different states all through the years. And coming from someone who's from Southern California, and anytime I'd have to travel to one of these cities, and I think they were even a client of ours back in an old company I worked for. We did a lot of the merchandise for them. I had to go see this place because it was such a phenomenon. Everyone tells you in certain places you got to go to a Cracker Barrel, you got to go to a Waffle House if you're in that part of the country. And I was thoroughly blown away with the richness and the character and the attention to detail. To me, it felt like something like walking into Frontierland at Disneyland or parts of Knott's Berry Farm here in Southern California as well. It had that level of attention and storytelling. And, that's what's made it who it is. But here they have really stripped it down. And I don't know if they were listening to their clients, if their customers, if they got a lot of data that said they needed to do this. And again, you don't have to go to the full extreme. I've seen the before and after pictures of kind of like where they've taken it now, and it just does look like every other restaurant in the world. So it's hard to see that this is happening, but they had data, they were making big changes. Now, Cracker Barrel claims this is a nod to their original 1969 logo, which was also just text. That sounds like a cop-out to me. Let's be real. That's not what built their legacy. What we remember is that woodcut style Americana illustration, a logo you could practically hear creaking as the rocking chair goes back and forth. Like, that's what it had. So let's talk about the reaction. It was swift and it was loud. The stock fell more than 7% after the announcement. The Twitter X Reddit world was on fire with people calling it bland, soulless, and even woke corporate neutering. A Reddit user summed it up by saying, "I didn't even recognize the sign when I drove by. They killed the brand I grew up with." I can't imagine ever that being the response to something I was behind. I think I would feel like it's just a shame it got to that part, I guess. The emotional backlash was real, not because people are design experts. And I think that's why these ones blow up, right? It's, yes, the designers are in that conversation, but it's more the consumer talking about it. But this one felt like a loss. And that's the crux of today's episode, okay? The bigger trend here was why debranding is happening. And I think this is a bigger conversation to talk about. Cracker Barrel is just the latest domino in a long line of legacy brands who've decided to clean house, basically. Here's what's been done recently. Let's look at some ones. Johnson & Johnson dropped their 137-year-old signature script for a geometric sans serif. I'm sure you guys have all seen that one as well. I think that's a huge one, and that's just type, right? We're not even talking about imagery. Burger King went flat, but they brought back a very retro vibe. Kia switched to a monogram so abstract that people thought it said KN. I love that logo, by the way. Pepsi simplified again to better fit screen-based applications in their latest rebrand. And Starbucks dropped all text. Now they just have the siren that remains in most of their logo applications. You still see Starbucks, but they've kind of separated those two there. But why is this happening is the bigger question. Let's break it down. There's digital first branding, and that's what most companies in this genre are kind of like living in. Logos have to live in very tiny spaces. App icons, social profile pics, smartwatch interfaces. Yeah, it's as small as that, right? Details just don't have any kind of scale help when it comes to these things. That's what they're noticing, and they're basically stripping them down to the most simplest of things to work on these smaller screens. There's global consistency to keep up with that. The legacy brands operate across dozens of countries and platforms. A simplified mark is easier to reproduce everywhere on packaging and in digital signage, even all the way down to embroidery, which I totally get as well. But this idea of like the global consistency is a trouble one for me, because the last few times I've been out of the country, it's kind of interesting to see. You could see that at play. You could see the brands that now live in multiple continents, multiple countries all over the world. And those stripped down things just kind of like give them such a bland look. They don't, yes, I can recognize it. And I saw Amazon Fresh when I was in London. I just thought that was so odd. I was like, really? They have that here too? And there it was. And it just, yeah, maybe there's recognition. But to me, it was like, then I thought, is there a story behind Amazon Fresh? Not really, because their logo is so stripped down. And this global consistency thing is kind of what I'm seeing happen so much. And it just felt like, there's just no excitement left, you know? The next area there is efficiency and cost. Flat, minimal logos reproduce better across media. That is true. They're easier to animate. They're much more easier in responsive websites and different UX UI, and require fewer variations. That means faster design systems and lower production costs. There's a thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way. It's like, if you are stripping down your logo to put in lower production costs because you have too much complexity, or maybe there's two colors instead of one, that's a decision, unless you are like completely strapped and the data is telling you to do this because of budget cuts or whatever. I understand that. Budgets are real. But if you are stripping the character and the personality of your logo because of that one particular thing, that's a real tough one for me. I mean, yes, I understand like embroidery and certain things like that. I would just say, there are things there to avoid like gradients and things like that. That I understand. But, a two-color logo with some storytelling in it is not really asking for too much. And the last one there is design trend fatigue. Flat design became all the rage in like the mid 2010s, and we haven't let go yet. We've seen wave after wave of simplification, and companies want to stay modern and clean, right? But here's the problem. When clarity kills character, and I think that's what we're seeing with so many of these different things, that kind of downside to me is the number one thing. I think I've just in the last 5 years really, really focused more and more on storytelling when it comes to any brand I've created, or if I've even had to rebrand. I've had to even rebrand logos that I've created originally. And one thing I always strive for is say the most with the least. I think that's my golden rule when it comes to logos, because a lot of these facts are true, right? Scalability, recognizability, all of these things. But I wanted to strike an emotional chord too. And I think you can do that. There's plenty of examples of simplification, really good, simple logos that really do the trick with that. So designers are seeing these debrands and asking, where did the story go? When you strip everything down to a text treatment, you risk erasing the emotional hook. I think that's what I saw with Cracker Barrel. I think there could have been the smallest of like paid respect to the past and the iconic person and the barrel or whatever could have been in this new logo, and still be just as simple, just the same two colors, and it still could have worked. We've reached this weird paradox where every brand looks different but feels the same. And that's dangerous because emotion is the glue of branding. I'm still teaching that. I think there's my first kind of slide I show in my branding class is these people walking out of an Apple store holding up a box from an iPhone, and these people cheering them on like they were the first to get it. Do you remember those days? Like, that's the emotional kind of like glue that I feel like makes branding work. What gets us even as consumers to buy the brands that we do. You can swap out Cracker Barrel's new logo with half a dozen other direct-to-consumer brands and not blink. It's generic. It doesn't speak to their uniqueness, their roots, or their vibe, all right? And here's some of the design chatter. This is some of the stuff I found. These logos look like they came from a free font site. Yeah, it's true, right? Everything's becoming bland and interchangeable. I'm sure you've all seen that image of all those brands, particularly in like the high level fashion and jewelry and space. They've all debranded to a all caps sans serif font, just like their competitor. They've stripped down all of their character fonts, any iconic icon or logo that they had or monogram. It's kind of wild. I miss when logos had a sense of place. Yeah, I know. Like, I think that's why we still gravitate to a lot of these ones that have an emotional connection to us. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of type-only logos, word marks, having so much rich character and fun typography that's a lot of designers' way of still keeping some emotion and some originality in there, but keeping it very simple to a lot of these new rules. Even the CEO of Johnson & Johnson said in a quote, "We had to modernize, but we had to be careful not to sever ties with our emotional brand equity." But technically, you kind of really did. I don't think there was any reason to make that change. Super readable, signature font, and script in their old one, but to switch to a sans serif thing, like, where's your emotional brand equity? I just don't see it. So not serving emotional brand equity, let's think into that a little bit more. Here's a toolkit that I think we could all use. Because last time I checked, like, we're being represented at the table more and more. Creative is a big part of a lot of these conversations when it comes to brand initiation from scratch, rebrands, you name it, refreshes, whatever it is. I think it's our opportunity to convince others. Maybe there's too many non-creatives in some of these meetings that they are making the debranding and the unbranding so popular, and there's not enough creatives standing up or raising their hand. So let's flip the script. What if you got tapped to rebrand a company with history? Maybe it's a mom and pop bakery that's been around for 40 plus years, or a local record store with loyal, regular customers, or even a bigger retail chain. Here's the step-by-step framework to avoid a Cracker Barrel style backlash. All right. So step one is the audit of the legacy. Why wouldn't you start there? Look at the legacy of this brand. Here's some things to think about and some questions to ask. What do customers love most? Interview stakeholders. Also, the super fans. I remember working with Burger King back in the day, and we had a term that everything that we created for Burger King was revolved around the super fan. That's what it was referred to in all of the pitch decks and you name it. And they had great data to know what a super fan of Burger King wanted. So interview those people, interview the stakeholders. If you haven't seen that amazing video that was on YouTube a few months ago by Super Ordinary, where he rebranded a sandwich shop, and that was the whole basically content of this video. One of the things he did was he interviewed employees and their top customers to get some insight as to what made this brand and this store, this sandwich shop, so engaging, so part of a town, part of a community. And he used that data to recreate a new logo form, which is great. So talk to them. What do customers love the most about your brand? If Cracker Barrel did this, I wonder if the content was really there. Did they get insight from their customers, maybe even their employees, about how important the legacy of that logo was? Next question, what emotional or cultural artifacts are sacred to your brand? Why not ask that question? If they did this, and imagine it was overwhelmingly, well, it's your guy, it's your mascot, it's Herschel, right? I'm gonna find some way of getting that in there, 100%. I would be such an advocate for it in the design process and as the designer or the brand lead. Maybe it was the mascot, maybe it's the color, maybe it's the tagline, or maybe it's just something in the vibe that a consumer could not describe in so many different specifics, but just say it's your overall vibe. That's what works. That's what's sacred. Don't lose that. And then next, don't redesign until you truly understand the emotional center of that brand. And I mean, in this world of like AI and stuff, guys, like why wouldn't we zero in on this so much more? Don't redesign until you truly understand the emotional center of a brand. That's the value you as a human, you as a creative can truly bring that I just don't feel anything else can kind of match. So if we lose that, we're done. So tips to ask the client. If we could only keep one thing from your brand, what would it be? Start to understand what's number one on their list. And when I do this with a team or a group or a client, I make sure I'm doing it with my point person. And I ask them to gather the information, do a poll. I'll even make a form for them that they can give out to all their employees or just the top shareholders that they want to talk to. And I tell them, you come back to me with the top answer. I don't want to hear what Bob over here says and what Cindy over here says. You know what I mean? I want the consensus of what your team thinks. If there's only one thing we can keep that has to be in this rebrand, what would it be? So make sure it's in there, right? This is our way of making sure we're getting all the right stuff to understand how to move forward. Step 2, define where the logo needs to work. Again, here's Cracker Barrel. 90% of the time you're going to see it is either on the road or as a destination, right? And just like that one fan said, if I don't even recognize it anymore, like that's my place, and you've changed it that bad. So if you've defined where the logo needs to work, meaning signage, outside, exterior of the building, or maybe it's only online or whatever it might be, define that. App icons, business cards, truck wraps, merchandise. You're designing for function, not just looks, and we know that. So what I always love to do is take the top applications that this new rebrand or this new logo is going to live in, and you can basically apply it there and get a really good temperature of how it's going to work. Particularly if you're still trying and you're the advocate trying to keep some element of storytelling or some element of the legacy of that brand in their logo, there's the perfect way to test it. So whatever your applications are, make sure you're putting it there as well. Build a visual map of real world use cases. So one of the things you can do is put that together in one big mood board slide. I like to kind of put all those together once I've presented a lot of application shots for whatever logo or rebrand we're doing, then show it in a beautiful one pager that gives the whole story, right? Don't forget logo systems, logo kind of like collections are the new kind of, requirement now for almost any brand or rebrand. So there could be just a text-only version. That might be a part of the collection. And guess what? In a situation where it's too small and a more complex logo would not work, you can just substitute for that one. But when you've stripped it out completely from the entire brand like outline and brand kind of guidelines, I feel like you've missed out. So build that visual map of real world case studies and applications and show it off. Print it out. Show the clients how the current logo fails or succeeds in each environment. So you could do this as well by looking at the where they are now. So in rebrands only, right? Taking their current one and showing it off in these things. This is where you can show that there is an inconsistency in one logo being used across multiple applications. And all the more reason for a logo collection that offers flexibility and how you can still use storytelling rich logos as a part of that logo system for certain applications that work the best. So one of those things too, if you are live with these people and it's not something where you're doing more remote or hybrid, let's say via Zoom, definitely when you're meeting them, have the printouts. I think there's something tangible about this. People want to see it real. Screens work great for sure, but what I love about that is it's something they can take away with, and they and their team can now look at it a lot more intimately than having to put it up on screen or looking at it on a small computer screen. So that was step 2, define where the logo needs to work. Step 3 is build a modular logo system, like we said. So now that you've looked at the previous one and where it's going to work and where it's going to live, look at the primary logo. Full detail for large scale use. That's great. Now we know we have that. For a large sign off of a highway, there's your ultimate opportunity to have what I like to call a primary or hero logo. This has everything, right? Why not? Again, we've established your logo doesn't just live in one place. It's going to live all over the place. So have that primary one. It's got everything, right? In fact, sometimes I take the primary and then the primary even gets like an add-on with maybe it has the tagline or maybe it has their motto or maybe, it has something else added to it in a fun way. Great. There it is. Secondary word mark, simple lockups for tight spaces. That's what we see in a lot of these rebrands, what we see really successful versions of it in creating a modular system. And then last, you have icons and symbols. These are for your apps, avatars, you name it, small little areas where you're just going to have that. Think of those responsive logos you've seen in the past where it shows kind of like the Walt Disney Company down to Walt Disney without the castle. Then it's just Disney. Then it's just the D, right? And then it might even be just a little star or a little kind of magic spark as the even smallest thing there, all the way down. That's how you create your modular logo system. So give that brand flexibility. You're not flattening it. You're almost expanding and giving it every chance to have all of these different modular pieces to use in all of these different applications. And think you're building a wardrobe, not a uniform, because I think that's what it is. It's bits and pieces. And the more I've created really good logo modular systems for my clients, they own it now more than ever. I think they love the fact that they've got these multiple pieces to pick and choose from, just like it would be if it was pieces of wardrobe. And now I love it too because I give them great names and they'll refer to them as those names. And now they start to understand and we're holding their hand through this process. And eventually, like if they're doing their own social media or they're doing their own merch because I've given them a modular system, they are advocates for the brand now. They want to use that primary one as best as possible. So giving them all of those different varieties and options makes them win. just the same way it did you when you landed it in with them and sold it. Step 4 is test it with real humans. Have we forgotten about this? Do an A and B comparison. Show the current versus the new identity. Even in maybe our small little bucket of clients that we're working with. And hey, maybe you're working with something as big as that, or maybe you're working with something that's in your neighborhood. Wouldn't it be smart to put the side by side there and get some insight on how well your new logo is doing? Show the current versus the new. You can use client surveys, social media assessments, or even do a soft launch. I know a lot of times too, you can almost like do something in a small launch. Maybe it's a like temporary bag or something that wouldn't cost a lot to do. And you can kind of test the waters with it and see if the new rebrand works. Get client feedback before you're all in. Look at when the Gap did that thing. Look at what was the other one that was really crazy with this rebrand? Tropicana. Those two were the two that everybody kind of talks about. Like, whoa, did you show a single human this thing, right? Gauge the feeling, not just the preference. Because remember, it's all about the feeling and it's all about the emotion that we want to hit here. Quote, if it feels like a downgrade to your loyal audience, it is. And I think that's why so many people were so quick to respond on what they saw when it came to what Crackle Barrel did. Step 5, roll it out with a story. I don't believe there was any story I saw in anything that was presented with this. It almost felt like they just put it out there and said, take it or leave it, right? Like maybe it just didn't cross my path. I did see the brand person or whoever's in charge of the brand out there in a few interviews, but it sounded like that was all taped prior to the reaction to it. So rolling it out with a story, what does that mean? Never just drop a new logo without an explanation. I know when I just currently rebranded a brand that I created originally, and one of the things I loved about it was we kind of teased it a little bit in social media, and that logo was started to show up kind of as a slow little transition. And I believe, talking to the owner, they mentioned that a few people were noticing it. They were like, whoa, what's that? That's a new logo that's not the one that's outside or that we've come to know, or it's on the cans. And little by little, we got really good response to it. In fact, I believe it told more of a story, and it could technically even be a simpler logo. So the idea there is like it kind of worked, and we tested it out. We rolled it out. We gave it a little story. We also knew the whole reason for the rebrand was less serious, more fun, and more kind of vibrant. And with that, everything we did kind of ticked off and checked those boxes. So we had a story to tell, and we brought it out in so many different ways. Now the brand has more fun. The brand has a little bit more animation to it, and I think it's growing, and seeing them do so much more with it on their social media and everything. Our old one was a little bit stagnant, and it didn't have the flexibility to play, and the new one does. So I love seeing that. I feel like we rolled it out with a story, and it really, really works. You want to craft a compelling narrative that explains what changed, why, and what maybe even stayed the same. There are certain things that, again, you want to keep in there as well. It's not a 100% change. You're blending new and old legacy. So talk a little bit about it. Help them with a press release. Help them with something that kind of shows that. And I think the one thing you gotta have is just the ammo behind it in case some client or some customer has a kind of response to it and it's not favorable. At least you're showing why you're doing the rebrand and what difference you wanted to bring to this. And I think I've never really get onto these rebrands too vocally because I wasn't in the meetings that those designers were and that company were to develop what the number one or top 5 things for this rebrand needed to be. I'm not a part of it. I don't know what led them to do it. So I'm not going to kind of have an opinion on it so much. I can tell you if I like it or not, but in most cases, when you look at when like Instagram rebranded, everybody threw that under the bus, but they had a long-term understanding and insight and kind of data-driven reason as to why that rebrand was done. I think it's one of the most successful ones of all time. And now look at how it stood the test of time. It hasn't needed much of a revamp or a tweak in any other way, and it's still a leading, more recognizable logo. So we've crafted a compelling narrative, explains what changed, why, and what stayed the same. Help the audience understand this is growth, not goodbye. Wow, that's so awesome. This is growth, not goodbye. I think that's a perfect thing to maybe even start your pitch with. If you're doing a rebrand for someone, give them that expectation and live to it, and make sure you're holding yourself up to that thing. Here's some quick do's and don'ts. It's like a cheat sheet for all of us to kind of look through. Here's the do's, all right? Honor the legacy. Make intentional callbacks to the brand's roots. I love that, right? Finding those little things. I think that's sometimes the most amazing part of any kind of brand refresh or brand start when it comes to that same thing. Looking into the history of where this came from, what was the inspiration behind it. But particularly in the rebrand, go as far back as you can, interview them, talk about it. What were those magic stories that led the founders to where they are today? Use simplification as a strategy, not a shortcut. So meaning the simplification of like how you walk them through it, keep it very simple, right? That's not you saying it's a shortcut. I'm only going to spend a little bit of time kind of understanding and building that new rebrand or whatever it is by looking at the brand's roots. So make sure you're doing a lot of the back end and you're doing a lot of the research behind the scenes, but the way you present it should be simple and clean cut, and that will give them a lot more understanding of your intention of how to take the brand to the new level. All right, next, think systems, not just marks. I think marks, even if you're making a system and you're thinking of them kind of like little solo islands, they don't work together. They don't have a kind of purpose. What I love to do is take, like I said, that primary, the hero one, and start narrowing it down, stripping it down, and bringing it to a more simple and iconic icon. And however many you need, there's no magic number. Try to figure out as many as your client is going to need in all of those different applications that you looked at. And I think you'll have a winning combination and a winning collection of logos that will really, really work. So think systems, not just marks. And the last do, communicate change with transparency and excitement. So the transparency is all that you've learned, everything you wanted to pour into this new one, and then the excitement of why this is such a great new level and representation of a brand moving forward. Because remember, this is growth. It's not a goodbye. So you've got to show off some excitement when it comes to that new rebrand. The don'ts. Don't just drop visual anchors with no replacement. That's what we saw. We saw the drop of such an iconic illustration with this one, and there's no replacement, nothing at all. That if it's that gold to the brand and to its reputation and to its story, don't just drop it. Find some way. If it's simplification, if it's having it on its own, letting it live in illustration or patterns or whatever it might be, find a way to represent it. Next up, the next don't follow trends blindly. I think what's happening is someone might see a successful rebrand that did it right, but the only takeaway that maybe a competitor saw of it is, oh, they just simplified it. We can do that too. There's too much involved to these things, and very easily you can ruin it and you can make this a not successful rebrand. It takes a really good designer to handhold the client through this process, and just don't follow a trend because it was visible, right? Show them the process of bringing out a much better and more insightful new rebrand logo. Third one on the don'ts. Don't let function override the feeling. We've talked about that. There is a lot of function here, and the logo does have to play in certain spaces and be adaptable, but don't let that override the feeling and the emotions that these logos have in their legacy. And the last don't assume your audience will just get it. If that's ever spoken in a meeting, I would be like, I'd raise my hand immediately and say, we're just gonna let them try to figure this out on their own. No, give the story behind it. Tell why and include the excitement. So the wrap up, what are we losing? Minimalism isn't evil. Let's just be clear. When it's done well, it can help brands scale, stay relevant, and reduce visual clutter. Because that's the goal. We got to find a balance between the two there. But minimalism should increase clarity, not erase character. That's what we saw, I think, happen, and that's why everyone's freaking out. Your job as a designer isn't to just simplify, it's to distill. So think of that. We're not just simplifying it. Distilling it means you're trying to hold on to original DNA that's in there and just making it more clear and simple. To take something rich, textured, emotional, and refine it without flattening it. That's the magic and that's the craft. And again, like I said earlier, you want to stand out in this world where so much competition and AI kind of knocking on our door, think of that one more time. To take rich, textured emotion, refine it without flattening it. That is the magic. So when the next Cracker Barrel walks into your inbox, remember this. You're not just designing a logo. You are protecting a legacy. If the client's not doing it, and God bless them, maybe they're not the ones that really understand that. They're being too pressured by shareholders or the competition or whatever it might be. Who steps in and protects the legacy? Us. Just remember that. So, call to action to you guys. What's your take on this entire rebrand topic? You can be specific as getting into why you love what happened with Cracker Barrel, why you hate it. Give me specifics. I'd love to hear about it so we can kind of share a little bit more. I'll make a follow-up episode if I can get enough kind of like feedback from you guys on what to do, but just don't lose sight of these things that, again, we are here to make sure we're protecting the legacy of any rebrand that we do. I will have a downloadable kind of checklist of the things that we talked about, the do's and the don'ts. I think it's just great stuff to kind of talk about, better than to just trash on the designers or whatever that have been putting together. I'm sure they worked incredibly hard on what they produced, but it's small little things that I feel like if we're not being advocates for as designers, everything's going to go that way, and we're just going to lose legacy and we're going to lose storytelling. So I hope this helps, guys. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next Deeply Graphic Design Cast. Oh, and by the way, this is Heyo. I think it's one of the best logos out there. See ya.